Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the United States Fab Lab Network webinar, Fab Lab Planning and Justification. This webinar is hosted by Maytech Networks, and I'm Mark Ficani from Maytech. Thank you for joining us again. I'd like to ask first, how many people are familiar with Elluminate? If you are, please raise your hand. A couple people, great. Let me just quickly give you a brief overview. The screen right here where you see my little laser pointer is called the whiteboard. The whiteboard is where all the slides will show up. You also have what is called the chat board, the chat box and the chat window. In the chat box is where you can type up any questions that you have if somebody's speaking. That way, if a question comes up and you don't want to interrupt the speaker, just type it into the chat box and I will read it out loud to the presenter at the time so that they can answer it. What I'd like to do is first take a moment to get you familiar with the chat box and have you type in your organization and how many people are in the room with you. Your name will come up with the chat box, so that's all you have to do is type in your organization and how many people are in the room with you. So go ahead and do that with the chat box. And one thing just to let you know, I can see when people aren't typing, so I did not see Steve type in the chat box yet.
Steve is with me, so he moved away from the computer.
Okay, so Steve has an excuse then. Good, because everybody was participating, and that's great. Now, one thing just to let you know is you may see somebody you know on the in the chat participants box, and if you send them a message, I as a moderator and the other moderators can see any message that you send. The moderator or the participant box allows you to see your fellow people in the room. Now, if you may want to not chat type something, but you hear something that you like, let the presenter know. You can give a smile, you can give a clap, or maybe you don't like it and you can give a thumbs down just to give the presenter some clue of that you're listening and paying attention, but you like what they say. So let's just practice using this real quick. And this is right below the participants box. And so give a smile if you're happy that it's Friday. Carol is a little confused. Oh, there's her smile. Good. Yes, I'm definitely happy it's Friday. Wonderful. Okay. Well, such a small group, I expect you guys to be vocal, so I expect a lot of chat to come up. I'd like to introduce Kelly Zalesnik, and she is the United States Fab Lab Network chairperson, and she's going to give a welcome and introduce our next speaker. Kelly?
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. Yes, my last name is Zalesnik, and as I told other people, I love my husband very much. I'd like to welcome everyone in attendance today on behalf of the USFLN to our first in a series of webinars centered on digital Fab Labs. And this webinar specifically talks about planning and justification for a Fab Lab. I would like to, first of all, thank our host, Maytech, and thank Mark for being here with us today and providing the technology so that we may conduct this webinar. And I would also like to thank all of the members of the USFLN, and specifically I'd like to thank Carol King, who is our Vice Chairperson and moderator today, Jim Janesy, who is our Director of Development and former Chair of the US Fab Lab Network, in addition to thanking David Richardson, who is our Director of Outreach, and also thanking Steve Gallagher, who is here with us today, who is our Director of Finance and Technology. The role of the United States Fab Lab Network is really to support MIT's Fab Lab Charter, which is to foster creativity and develop global network of local Fab Labs and enable invention by providing access to individuals with digital tools. The role of the USFLN is also to foster invention and innovation in academics, in business development, in community outreach, and also research. And really, we are all about sharing and collaboration where really we recognize that the whole is greater than the sum of the individual parts. and that we take an inclusive view rather than an exclusive view. So we would like to welcome people into our network. We would like people who have an interest in digital fabrication to join and participate in our network. We are always looking for new membership, new partners, new ideas. And with that, I would like to turn this over to Carol King, our moderator, and I hope that you find the information today useful. Carol, please.
Thank you very much, Kelly, and good morning and welcome to all of you who've joined us from across the United States and actually the rest of the world. It's great to see you all here, well, virtually anyway. So the first thing I'd like to do is reintroduce the panelists and give you a little bit more information about them, just to let you know where they're from. So Kelly Zalesnik, our chair of the USFLN, is from Lorain County Community College, where she is the academic dean of engineering technologies and the Nord Advanced Technology Center. Barbara Craig is the Executive Dean of Lake Michigan College and also a USFLN member in the Communications and Development Committees. Steve Gallagher is the Fab Lab Manager at Fox Valley Technical College. James Janessi, who we'll call Jim, is the Development Manager of Manufacturing Technologies at Fox Valley Technical College. And David Richardson is Faculty Emeritus from Lorain County Community College. So I'm pleased that all of us are available with you today, and I'm also very happy that Mark from Maytech is here to help host and help guide us when we run into any problems. So a couple of things that I'd like to go over. If folks have questions as the panelists are talking, please feel free to send the questions into the chat box or raise your hand in the way that Mark showed us earlier. So next, what's going to happen is Jim Janessi is going to describe the Fab Lab Lifecycle, which is where this information from the Planning and Justification webinar is pulled from. This webinar is part one. It's a pilot webinar, by the way, so it's our very first one. Forgive us any glitches, but we're hoping that it's all going to go pretty smoothly. So this pilot webinar is part one of a two-part webinar that's based on the Fab Lab Lifecycle developed by the Midwest Fab Digital Fabrication Partnership as part of a National Science Foundation funded project. The webinar is jointly sponsored by USFLN and the MDFP NSF project. And now what I'd like to do is turn it over to Jim so he can give us a brief overview of the Fab Lab Lifecycle. Jim?
Thank you, Carol. I'll briefly share with you kind of the background, the genesis, and more importantly, the application of the life cycle and its supporting methodology. As you see in the slide here, it's based on some proven industry techniques. If you look at any successful technology implementation, whether it's information or fabrication technology, there's a couple of critical things that make it work. And technology tends to be the focus of things, but one of the more proven techniques of industry is that successful technology projects are really the effective convergence of people, processes, and technology. Sometimes the technology tail wags the dog, and anytime you do an audit of any failed or troubled projects, invariably there's some issues that could occur in any of those three dimensions. So it's critical not only for technology implementations but Fab Labs that we understand and plan for that. Another important aspect of technology implementations is there's a distinction between installing technology and implementing it. Often, for whatever reason, people tend to focus on just getting things installed and using perhaps the mentality, if we build it, that they will come, which may not always be the case. It's also creates some other risks and also may inhibit using your resources and your time properly. So what we've done as USFLN and the Digital Fab Grant is try to bring together a structured approach, a building block approach, using some proven industry practices, as well as all the lessons learned from the early Fab Lab adopters. we can all reflect on arrows in different parts of our organization and things we would have done differently. So we've tried to include as much of the lessons learned and important things to consider in this whole building block approach. We've actually piloted the Lifecycle methodology with a number of organizations, including Rapid Tech, Saddleback Community College. And if you talk to Ken or Ed out there, I think they felt that going through a very in-depth version of what you're going through today really helped support and expedite their implementation. Before I go through each of the phases, just a couple of qualifiers. It might be possible to successfully implement the Fab Lab by not doing this, but as I said, you'll find you'll reduce the risk and optimize your resources. No organization will go through it explicitly as we're talking about. There's an old joke that's now kind of sick about how you can negotiate with a terrorist easier than a methodologist, and we're trying not to be methodologists. We want this structured approach to be adaptable and flexible to each of your implementations, regardless of where you are throughout the whole life cycle. The other thing I would mention is that the USFLN uses this structured approach to organize our resources, our mentoring and support for all our members. And any member organization, anybody who's even thinking about Fab Labs can join the United States Fab Lab Network. And we will offer a much more in-depth version of this, potentially on a cost recovery basis, if you'd like to take advantage of this and plan your Fab Lab journey. On the next slide, you see each of the 11 phases of the Fab Lab lifecycle. The ones we're focusing on today are highlighted in asterisk. Again, using kind of a building block approach as well as self-qualifying after each phase, we think can really optimize your chances for success. But today we'll be discussing the research phase, interest generation, justification, and planning and commitment. I referred earlier to the distinction between installing and implementing a system and technology where it's really serving your purposes and achieving your goals. That'll be covered in a future webinar, and Carol can give you more details on that. But as you go through each phase, you do have to be mindful of succeeding phases. For example, when we talk about justification, you do have to factor in sustainability down the road, how to keep your operation viable. And so the checklists and the questions, the key questions, and any other resources we shared are intended to be considered across the different phases. On the next slide, to kind of show you the format we'll be using today, or we would use an in-depth webinar to assist the planning for your organization. We're going to go through each phase, and we've identified some major questions or considerations we want to share with you. It's not all-inclusive. We've got other checklists and resources we can share with you as well, but our panelists will share with you not only kind of our formal thoughts, but some other tips and techniques as we move forward to this. And with that, I'll turn it back to Carol.
Thanks, Jim. So what I would like to, again, remind people is that if you have questions while the panelists are talking, please raise your hand or send the question in the chat box to me. We're going to begin the research phase by hearing from Barbara Craig and Steve Gallagher. Barbara, when you first introduced yourself, if you could tell us a little bit about your Fab Lab and how long it's been online and where it's located before you get into the research phase, that would be great.
Wonderful, thank you. It's dangerous to ask these champions to talk about their Fab Labs because we like to talk a lot about them, but briefly, I'm a small campus of a community college just north of the Indiana state line in Michigan, and we had our first Fab Lab email. I kept it for posterity, July 2008. So we've been working slowly and with a very slim budget, as most people have since then. And we've had several hundred people through the Fab Lab of all ages, and we are great proponents of it. And Yes, my section is, I'd like to talk to you briefly about research, and unfortunately I'm not able to see your responses at the moment, but I think that if you are this far along in the game, if you're up bright and early on a Friday to participate in this webinar, I suspect that you've done some research already. I'm interested in knowing perhaps how many of you have physically been into a Fab Lab, so maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. But you're on the right track. The people who are speaking to you today, not necessarily myself, but the other panel of experts here are fantastic resources who will be able to help you and inspire you and uplift you and move you along the way in your Fab Lab cycle. And there are several questions that we know that you need to have the answers to. What is out there in Fab world, of course, is a very big one. And where can I go to make sure I've got the most up-to-date information? How do we keep discovering more, and what do we know about what we need ourselves? So in addition to looking outside and what's going on in the Fab world, in the Fab folk sphere, it's going to be very important for you to remember to keep looking inside yourself and looking inside your own specific needs, because we have to, it's so easy to be tempted by all of the wonderful things that are out there. Quite simply, an internet search that begins with the MIT website, Fab Central, will take you to lots of places. So I think any research would begin there. I'm sure the other members would agree. If you start at Fab Central, very soon you'll find yourself, if you go to the About page, you'll see the list, the most current up-to-date list of how many Fab Labs there are, and the number's growing all the time. It's fantastic to see the emails of, we're having our grand opening, we're just opening up our Fab Lab. But then that will quickly take you to the link about Fab Folk, and from Fab Folk you can get to Fab Wiki, and then from there you can get to the blog Planet Fab, and it will take you to lots of interesting places in your journey. It will feel like you've gone through the looking glass, and you'll just be taken on this wonderful journey to lots of other resources and lots of other people who are like-minded like you. So absolutely the MIT website is a good place to start. Another really wonderful resource is this United States Fab Lab network, and I'm so grateful to the pioneers who went ahead of us in shaping the Fab Lab Lifecycle model and all of the resources that they have. So that website is a wonderful one as well. There are many other fun things out there. You will, if you go onto Facebook, you'll see many of the Fab Labs, as many of you do, have their own pages and are able to link you to cool things that are going on with them. So yes, it's very easy to get caught up in all the wonderful things that are going on outside. You know, the fact that the Fab Labs in Iraq are very excited about the bandwidth that they're able to garner nowadays, and the fact that the Fab Lab in Champaign-Urbana has been responsible for some beautiful wedding invitations and everything in between, all of the wonderful possibilities of this Fab Lab world. So keep looking outside. There are wonderful things going on, but also you have to keep looking inside to what you want. Those questions like, what do I need to know about what we need? What resources are available for me? How do I know how Fab Labs and their needs and resources all intersect? It's important to be a part of the community, I think, so that you can get all of those questions answered. If you haven't already, I think one absolutely must read Neil Gershenfeld's book, Fab, and make sure that you have looked inside your own organization to understand what the problem is that you would like to solve by having Fab Labs within your institution or within your community. And I think we're all coming from different spaces. I'm coming from education, where I'm very interested in making sure people are turned on to the fact that they are able to explore their creativity and explore their interest in science and technology. I'm also interested in the economic growth and development of my region. And as Fab Labs, we tend to sort of fall into that ABC area that we talk about. We're either academic, or we're interested in business, or we're interested in growing our community in a more sort of sociological standpoint. So each Fab Lab is going to have its different area of expertise. There's lots of literature to help us explore those wonderful things that we're interested in, the neuroscientific development of how one learns in a Fab Lab, how knowledge is acquired in a Fab Lab, how the Fab Lab makes our brains act differently, all of those wonderful things that Eric von Hippel talks about as he talks about how innovation changes our brain as well. And also everything that's happening in Wired magazine, Chris Anderson, and the whole the movement of understanding that atoms are the new bits. I encourage you to look for information about things that are happening in Chris Anderson's world, controversial as it sometimes is.
Barbara, thank you very much. If you, that's an awful lot of information. Do you have some more thoughts for us, or shall we ask Steve to give us some of his ideas on research?
I think yes. I just want to sort of summarize clearly that yes, I encourage you to just get out there and start exploring. Get out there and start visiting. Nothing really beats a conversation with a Fabber. I encourage you to participate in the consortiums and in the Fab 7s coming up in Peru. For those of you who may be able to attend, just rubbing shoulders with each other, going on the road and visiting with each other is a wonderful way to do the best kinds of research. But I also you'll be taken down the path of everything that's going on out here, and you'll see an increasing amount of supporting documentation from organizations like the National Science Foundation, and that's something that Steve has done a fantastic job on. So perhaps Steve could talk about some of the research that he's been involved in, and I thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Barbara. Steve, before you talk, if you could give us a little information about FVPC's Fab Lab, and then enter right into the conversation on research, please.
Okay. FVPC's Fab Lab started in 2007, I believe. We started with our first small lab on campus. Last fall, we opened a 2,500 square foot Fab Lab across the street. And we now have a third Fab Lab a couple miles at a satellite college office. So we have 3 Fab Labs. And I just have a couple notes. Barb did a good job. If we go back to that research phase slide, what do we know about Fab Labs? I just want to point out that all the Fab Labs are not the same. Don't try and make yours like someone else's, because your mission, vision, and what you're going to do with it is going to be different. What Fab Labs exist to our perspective, there are plenty of lists out there. None of them are correct. If you open a list, it's going to be different from the last one you open. We are approaching probably exponential growth, and so I don't think you're going to find an accurate list. Where and how do we discover more? You've got to tap other labs. USFLN has plenty of resources. They even have a nice startup kit for new labs. And my favorite, what do we know about our present future needs? I can guarantee you that what you think your needs are today will not be your needs in 6 months or a year after you get the building, after you get your money. You know, they have that, if you think back, they had that Buick commercial where they used to say, "This is not your dad's Buick." Well, that's what I tell my boss, because the Fab Lab today is not the Fab Lab he started in 2007. So you've got to change as your mission changes, and be prepared to roll with it. And that's about all I'm going to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So folks, the next piece of our Fab Lab life cycle is the interest generation phase. And in this segment, we're going to be hearing from David Richardson, and then he'll be followed up by Barbara Craig. So David, again, if you could begin by telling us a little bit about the Fab Lab that you're associated with, how it started, and where it's going.
Okay, first of all, truth in advertising. I'm the resident techno-literate in this project. I'm a retired English professor from Cleveland State, and invited Neil to my after-retirement job at Lorain County Community College back in February of 2005. He came within 4 months. Lorain had a tiny Fab Lab in June of 2005, and it has grown joyfully with the collaboration of so many friends. What I'd like to do right here is talk about this interest generation phase and hold on to that first topic of identifying the champion to make just a few points first of all. And underlying this all is a major shift in what American education has been for a long time. It has been mostly abstract, conceptual, book-oriented. Neil identifies in his book Fab a 500-year-ago split between education and training. In other words, academics versus the crafts and the trades. What Fab tends to do is to reunify those two modes of learning. And I'd like to emphasize that one of the most successful ways of interesting people in Fab Labs is to show, not tell. You can throw all the books, ideas, and abstract concepts at people, but the best thing to do is take them to a lab and let them not necessarily do, but sit and watch. In 6 years, I have yet to see someone exit a Fab Lab without a smile on his face. It is absolutely transformative, including a senior professor once who said, okay, I'll come to your 2-hour demonstration, an introduction to the faculty and administration, but I don't have a lot of time. I might stay 30 minutes. Well, after 2.5 hours, we had to kick him out, and he wanted to come back the next morning. The visual, experiential presence of a Fab Lab is the single best way to make anyone interested in it. And in order to do that, we are fortunate today because there's probably a Fab Lab within a few hours drive of you. Steve was talking about the way this list of Fab Labs grows. The list that I've compiled based on Sherry Lassiter's list at the CBA website is now 39 in the United States. And so hit the list or inquire and find one that's close to you and go. That is the best thing to do to see what a Fab Lab is like and to show someone else. I'll come back to this with the champion in just a minute. But to understand what the Fab Lab model is all about, I can't recommend too strongly going to the Fab Charter. This is an ongoing draft which lays out the principles of Fab Labs. And this is one of the ways to discriminate between a Fab Lab, cap letters, and a fabrication laboratory. Underlying Fab Labs is a spirit of collaboration where we help each other, a spirit of openness where we share what we have, a spirit of cooperation and being considerate of other people and helping them grow. This is very different from the sage on the stage who lectures at people or the entrepreneur who makes a buck and gets it any way he can. This is truly a community project. And so I would say that if you read the Fab Charter and think carefully about its implications, you will find the spirit of what Fab Labs are all about. As Barbara mentioned, join the USFLN. This is a wonderful place to meet people, to see what Fab Labs are like. And I can't emphasize too strongly the chemistry of interaction. We can exchange emails, we can trade files and projects and so forth, but meeting with people is one of the most unpredictably creative ways of making change and progress. So this is another reason to visit a Fab Lab. Let's see, I think getting back to the champion business, what I would suggest is, first of all, a Fab Lab to visit virtually. Fab Lab Tulsa is just opening up, and I've been browsing around on their website recently. It's an excellent place to see a Fab Lab being built, and it also ties in with the notion of who your champions are. And so I want to go back to the idea of the champion to end this bit of our conversation. Without a champion, your project is doomed. You must have a champion. And what I want to say is a little broader here. You must have champions. These are people who care about Fab Labs and what Fab Labs do. And in identifying a champion, what I would like to suggest is that you look at the entire spectrum of people who have an interest or concern or responsibility. Think, for example, of the ABCs of FAB, academics, business, and community outreach. In academics, there are university structures which begin with, ostensibly starting at the top, the president, the provost, the academic faculty, the staff, the maintenance staff at the institution, and the students themselves. Well, each one of these segments of an academic community can be a champion for a Fab Lab. And what I strongly suggest is that you try to find a person at each of those segments of the structure who is truly interested in Fab Lab, because this becomes a passion, not a job. In a business community, there is always an internal structure from the president and chairman, or the CEO, COO, CFO, all the way down through the people who do the work and who make the site possible for the work to be done. So again, in a business, you will see that there is a wide range of people who have a vested interest in the project. In community outreach, in a community center, there are people who provide the funds, people who manage the site, people who counsel the users of the site, and so forth. Once again, each of these segments of that population is a potential champion, and the Fab Lab thrives best when you have a champion in each of those segments. I suppose the most dramatic instance of this of late is SEAL Team 6. Every one of the people on that team was different. Every one of them had a responsibility, and without each one of them, that mission would not have ended up the way it did. A weak link in any one of the champions, and you have potential problems. So let me encourage you to find as many champions as you can, as diverse champions as you can, and then when they visit a Fab Lab and see what happens, they will experience it, and it will be much, much more than academic, and you'll have someone on your side literally from top to bottom of the operation. And that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you, David. Barbara, do you have any additional notes on interest generation? I can go back to the previous slide if you'd like to see the list, or I'll stay on resources and recommendations.
I think David's absolutely right. We get an energy between us when we start talking with each other. We just had a visit from Champaign-Urbana the other day ourselves, and what was supposed to be an hour, just like you say, ended up being 4 hours and lunch and supper. So we can get an energy going between us. When you're in the situation where it's time to really start justifying to your interests, which is the next section that's coming up, I did want to not be remiss in mentioning some of the wonderful research that's out there to support the notion of what can happen when a Fab Lab can make a difference. The work of Peter Troxler, the work of Eric von Hippel, I think I mentioned, Henry Chesborough. We have, and I'd be happy to make sure anybody has all of the links to some of the work that is going on about the democratization of the power of Fab, the fact that we can put the power of tool making, the power of making things into the simple person's hands, and the power of the masses, the small masses, rather than the mighty few, to really make a difference. So there is lots out there to support the case that you will so obviously see needs to be made with your very own eyes. So yes, the justification part's the interesting part. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. So we're going to move on to, actually before we move on to the justification phase, are there any questions from the participants before we get into this next area? If yes, please go ahead and raise your hands. I'll give you a couple of seconds. Okay, we're going to move on to justification. And we're going to first hear from Jim Janessi, who's from the Fox Valley Technical College. And Steve already gave us an intro to FETC, so I'm not sure you have to do that part, Jim. But please tell us what you know about justification in Fab Labs.
Okay. Thank you, Carol. One item on the previous phase I wanted to share is we do have an informal startup kit, which is a collection of templates and documents we used. A number of us have used our internal selling phase, and Carol and I will coordinate that and make that available to you. But you really are in the previous phase and now the justification phase, taking on a bit of a selling and promoting role. So there are some tools, techniques, and examples we can share with to help you with that. As you move, as we said earlier, you need to kind of qualify each step. If you feel enough interest has been generated, you're starting to get a critical mass together, it's important in this phase to really ask yourself some critical questions. What will be the purpose of our Fab Lab be? You know, you've heard this concept already. Is it going to be academic? Is it going to focus on business, community outreach? There's examples of all this in the United States Fab Lab network. In our case, in Fox Valley Tech, we need to be active in three fronts. We're supporting our academic programs. We consciously decided to support inventor development at the beginning, so we're leveraging our Fab Lab resources and expertise to do that. And now the STEM outreach has actually become probably the most active dimension of that. But as you start to justify your own Fab Lab, you hopefully a picture is emerging of what the personality of yours be. What will the stakeholders be? You know, you see on this slide of all the variety of users, and even though you can't plan implementation with the mentality, if you build it, they will come. I think we all can assure you, once you get a Fab Lab on the air, you'll have people showing up at your door, sponsors, community people, taking your Fab Lab in directions you may not have expected. But emerging from that will become kind of the focus, the objectives of what your Fab Lab could be. That should then be translated into some metrics that will support your financials. In our case, we measure the touch points we have, how many inventors we've helped, number of patents, number of events, number of courses, all those types of things will help you start to derive the financials. As far as rules of thumb on your financial planning, you may hear in the Fab Lab kingdom you may hear recommendations that cost you $50,000, $30,000 to $50,000. Those typically are much lower than our experience has shown. It also reflects kind of the starter set of equipment. We think a better rule of thumb is that especially when you start augmenting with existing equipment you might have, and again, depending whether it's community-based or in an academic setting, it usually runs more like $100,000 to get the starter set of equipment. You'll probably match that in people costs. Often the people costs are buried or at least covered elsewhere. But you need to start to plan those financial parameters. From the people side, you know, we've talked extensively about a champion, but you now need to start translating some other roles. And we can't always say this will be in one person for each role. Executive sponsors need to emerge in the justification phase. That might be one person or two, or it might be a committee of people. The champion often morphs into a couple other roles, depending on the skill set that's available. But somebody needs to be the project coordinator. Typically that can be the champion. But you also need a technical leader, and that sometimes can be volunteers. It can be existing people in the academic world or even in the business world. And then usually you need some helpers or technicians. So there's about 4 or 5 roles you need to kind of plan for and justify. And Steve can share more kind of details about what those folks do in the planning phase. But from a financial justification, you need to allocate some funding to cover all those different elements of implementing a Fab Lab. On the slide about resources and recommendations, you see one example of an outreach program we've been doing, a Young Inventor Series. And so, you know, in our case, the STEM outreach has become a very critical part of that. And you'll find industry sponsors who are interested in supporting that. We just landed a $10,000 community sponsor who wants specific programs on green and personal fab. And so if you look at some of the templates in our startup kit, as you start to build your own justification, before you move on to the next phase, then you need to have all the key stakeholders, all the decision makers, review your plan, share some of the success stories of the other Fab Labs in the United States Fab Lab network, and really put together a justification package for your decision makers. We haven't talked time frames in the life cycle. Typically the interest in research and interest generation phase can be 6 months to a year. The next phase is justification, planning, and commitment, kind of vary by organization. If you can pull all this off within a year, I think that's somewhat accelerated. But suffice to say, USFLN has a variety of resources to help your justification efforts. I think, Kelly, from an executive point of view, is there any other thoughts you want to share about the justification of a Fab Lab?
You know what, Jim? Thank you. Yes, I'd like to just share some of the my experiences here at Lorain County Community College, and perhaps you could back up a slide for me, if that's possible. Oh, you have it?
I'll let Carol do it.
Thanks, Carol. For Lorain County Community College, as David had indicated to you, we were so fortunate through one of our speaker series to have Dr. Gershenfeld out. And so we, as a result of that, it's really kind of a humorous story. A high school student raised their hand and said, how do we get a Fab Lab here? And David was bold enough to go to the vice presidents and say, would you sponsor a Fab Lab? And they put up about 20 grand. So we actually started out in the closet. It was a very small space with just enough money to purchase equipment. And what we really did, because we're an educational institution, we looked at how would we use this Fab Lab as part of our educational programming. And fortunately, we had a faculty member who had a real interest in this, in the technology, and in the whole notion of a Fab Lab. So it really became part of his job. We assigned some release time to him out of his normal load to oversee the Fab Lab. And he developed a course for us based on a course that Neil Gershenfeld runs at MIT called How to Make Almost Anything. So part of our justification was that we would offer credit-based courses to students. We also offer non-credit courses and general interest offerings to the public through the use of the Fab Lab that help recover some money. We operate the lab almost exclusively through student workers. So we are able to have student laboratory assistants that are not, we're not paying someone $25, $30 an hour to oversee the lab. We have students who run it that are very familiar with the equipment. One of the things you have to be careful for when you use that kind of a basis is that you are always training and planning the next generation of student workers to oversee it. You need to make sure you have some continuity. But that is one of the ways that we have tried to minimize the impact of cost in running the lab. From a practical standpoint, people who come in off the street and maybe don't know what the lab is about, and you want to sit down and train them and get them started because it's, the tools themselves are meant to be easy to use. We always keep kind of a pile of scrap material, so someone coming in, we don't say, oh, you have to go buy stuff first or we'll sell you something. We say, hey, we can pull some things out of our scrap box and get you started right now. And I think that's a real draw. In terms of the justification at a larger level, because we kind of started out backwards, we were funded and we didn't exactly know what we were going to do with it. It was in part my job to figure out where does a Fab Lab fit in with our community college vision. And really we have used our Fab Lab in a couple ways. One, we are trying to enhance education for our students, especially in those areas that tend to be abstract that prevent our students from succeeding. So we have benefited by applying for some local college grants here to develop content around teaching students math teaching them abstract ideas in a more concrete way to help them be more successful in their math so it doesn't become a roadblock. So really what we're using the Fab Lab for is basically a retention tool, if you will. And we also host a number of 8th graders. We have a concerted effort where we're working with our Tech Prep Consortium, which unfortunately will no longer be funded, but will continue nonetheless. And we bring out all of the 8th graders in our county for an experience within our division, and invariably, and they're hands-on experiences in all of our program areas that are available to the students, but invariably everyone always chooses the Fab Lab. And so what we try and do is we try and provide experiences in the Fab Lab that relate to our other content areas. For example, if we know that the students are going to be doing a module on quality, we'll actually have them build calipers in the Fab Lab. And of course, one of the cool things to 8th graders is that they can personalize stuff. So we always give them the ability to personalize whatever they make and use in another module with their name or a logo. And we do pre and post assessment of these students, and of both the students and the teachers. And we've gotten just tremendous, phenomenal feedback. So we also use it as a recruitment tool. And we are right now working on modules for high school students. So the idea is that we have a continuum of offerings, and the high school level would be a higher level offering. But the idea is to, again, expose high school students to all of the different types of technology program offerings we have here, but have it touch the Fab Lab to give them a sense of the whole design process. So again, going back to the age groups, we also have a technology incubator housed on our campus. And so we work with them, not as much as I would like, but we are working with them to help inventors and entrepreneurs do product development and be a resource to them so that they can develop concrete prototypes that will enable them to seek additional funding. I'm not sure that I'm necessarily touching on everything from the justification phase, but really, again, it goes back to knowing for your institution, whether it be educational or business or community outreach, what is your hot button, what is it you're trying to accomplish, and then looking at how the Fab Lab can help do that. And I think that's allowed us to be successful in our justification. And just like Jim, we take metrics. We keep track of the number of people who take classes, the number of people that come into the lab and use it on a casual and ongoing basis, the number of people who started business using the Fab Lab. So we keep track of all of those metrics because it helps going forward. And then we also are very mindful about using our resources in the most economical way that we can. If there are any questions, I'd certainly be happy to answer them. And just a plug, if you want to visit the Fab Lab, you're always welcome to come out to ours if we're in close enough proximity to you or not. I will tell you that Scott Shishak, who is our faculty member, who's faculty in the Fab Lab, last year helped 9 different labs get started. He's a really tremendous and willing resource, great amiable fellow, and just very happy to help out. So I would like to just put in a personal plug. Give us a call if you're interested, and if we're not close enough, we'll find someone who will help you out.
Just the medicine syringe.
Kelly, thanks very much. Before I get to the hand that's being raised and questions, I'd like to ask that there's apparently someone in the background who may have a radio on or their speakers on, and it's contributing to some background noise. If you could turn that off so that we could clear up some of the sound problem that we seem to be having.
I was just doing an acting job. I wasn't doing.
So hopefully we'll get that straightened away. And then David, it looks as though you have a question.
I feel like I was kind of manipulated.
I just wanted to make one brief comment about justification. We look at justification as a challenge, a problem, a difficulty in planning for a Fab Lab. My experience has been you can simply put that on the pad and say, justification is an opportunity to show what a magnificent tool Fab Lab is. Think about all your potential champions, your potential angels or sponsors or funders or whoever these people may be. And look at what they do. Yes. Go ahead.
David, I'm going to break in for a minute and actually ask Mark to come back online. Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties, and the folks who are specifically connected just via computer cannot hear right now at all.
That's what I'm trying to figure out. Is everybody who's hearing the background noise?
Einstein also says when she first met the mom, she knew her as Terry Campbell.
Please raise your hand if the answer is yes.
I asked her for identification, and she showed me some of the
Okay, us on the phone line are not hearing it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear my microphone.
As for the medical exam, ABC News has confirmed that Brittany did see a doctor who looked for any physical signs of the Botox procedure, and the results have not been made public. But in our interview, the mom had told us her last injection was some 3 months ago.
I'm going to clear your radio.
It's extremely unlikely that you will see any effect from the Botox at this point in time. Either physically, her muscle movement should be back completely, and there
All right, folks, how's this sound? Okay, there we go. I think, okay. All right, you're good to go again.
Okay, great. David, I'm sorry that I broke in on you like that, but we needed to solve that technical difficulty before going on just to ensure that everybody could hear you. So if you want to continue on your thoughts, that would be great.
See how important the team is? There's always somebody on hand who can do something that one of us can't do. And Mark, thank you very much. But this is the collaborative aspect across the whole spectrum. Back to my point about using justification as a positive point. Almost any potential sponsor has a goal or a mission or a problem. In academics, at the moment, it happens to be STEM education. Fab Labs are magnificent tools for STEM education. They have a further advantage. Not only can they solve the problem, but they have the further advantage of being integrative across disciplines. A very important mode of operating in the current economy and academic setting. In any business, a manufacturing business, entrepreneurship and rapid prototyping is an expensive issue. Fab Labs are magnificent places to do prototyping and rapid prototyping and helping people get started with entrepreneurial new businesses. And in community outreach, we all have seen displaced workers or underskilled workers or workers who need to get new training in modern society. Fab Lab is a wonderful tool for that. So the long and the short of it is justification is part of your rationale for going to champions and sponsors to say, hey, I've got something that you can use. This completely reversed my attitude as a 35-year faculty member in a university where I was always begging administrators for budget cuts and budget lines. I would say, I need this for my project. Now with Fab Lab, we can simply go to the people with the means and say, look what you're trying to do. Let me help you. I'm a part of the solution to your problem. Not only can Fab Lab help to solve it, but Fab Lab will bring you some things that you haven't even guessed at as advantages to engaging this tool. That's a positive way of looking at justification. That's it.
Thank you very much, David. So before we move on to the planning phase, does anybody have any questions? If you do, could you raise your hand, please? Okay. We're going to move on to, oops, wait a second. It looks as though Peter Troxler has a question. So Peter, can you actually talk and ask us the question, or do you want to type it in via the chat window and I'll read it aloud? Okay. So Peter's going to type via chat, and I will let you all know what his question is, although most of you will be able to see it, except Barbara. So give us a moment while we wait. So Peter's asking us to tell us about our thoughts on sustainability in the early phases. Jim, let's start with you as far as a response to that, please.
Thank you, Peter, for the question. When we introduced the methodology, we talked about how you have to consider other phases. More specifically, when you're in these earlier phases, the when you're trying to plan and justify the Fab Lab, you do need to take some of the checklist of questions in sustainability phase, and in order to do the justification, you really have to factor some sustainability considerations in there. Educational institutions have a bit of an advantage because we already have an investment in facilities and so forth. And so from a facilities point of view, sustainability is less of an issue. If you're going to use a community-based one, maybe following like a text-based kind of model, then you would have additional costs and overhead associated with that. But assuming you find a way to address the facilities sustainability, when it comes to trying to identify revenue sources, sustainability sources for the other costs of your expense, obviously you're going to have the capital investment of equipment, which often is the easier aspect of sustainability. There's either people or sponsors that are interested in can cover the one-time. It's the ongoing parts of sustainability that become more of an issue. But if you're able to identify some economic development, some fee-based classes, membership, if you look at all the collective revenue streams of our United States Fab Lab network, there's a lot of creative ways to come up with sources of funding, especially volunteer and other technical assistance. But all that needs to be part of the business planning process and the formal document and formal process you go through before you actually go through to plan and commit to a Fab Lab. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Jim. Peter's noting that there's also the possibility of bartering with volunteers, etc. I'd like to make a comment about Fab Lab Tulsa. They're a community-based Fab Lab. They're starting up now. I understand they have some grant funds to help start them up, but one of the things they've really done very successfully in their area is they've got a huge network of community supporters. They've done that through a campaign called Ignite Tulsa, and I think they've jumped on to that campaign, and they've been able to do a number of presentations, not only to small groups, but to large people who are very involved in igniting Tulsa. And I think that has helped, at least start from the ground level, build a huge base of support that will help continue to sustain them as they move forward beyond the initial grant funding that they have. So that's some of my thoughts on it. Are there other panelists who may have some thoughts? If you do, could you raise your hand? David notes, well, I'm not going to read the chat window. There are some of you who can already see some of that. So before we move on to the planning phase, are there any other questions? David, go ahead.
Just a quick supplement to the volunteer issue. Let me suggest that you look creatively and imaginatively, perhaps after a good stiff drink in the company of other Fab Labbers, about other possible champions, sponsors, friends. Tulsa is a magnificent example because they're across the entire community of social clubs and chambers of commerce and banks and well-heeled people. In Fort Wayne, Indiana, Greg Jacobs is looking at the largest public library in the state of Indiana to use their Fab Lab as a partner. It's a 60-foot trailer. So who would have ever thought a giant trailer would collaborate with a library? Or who would have thought that the local banking industry in Tulsa would support a Fab Lab? But off the most unlikely sponsors are quite possible if you go at them with the right way of offering a positive tool rather than kind of a pleading petition for money. That's it.
Very good points, David. Thank you. So with that, we're going to move on to the planning phase. And again, if you have questions as our panelists are talking, please raise your hand and I will get to you after they're finished. We'll start by hearing from Steve Gallagher at Fox Valley Technical College and then some follow-up comments from Jim Janessi. Steve?
Yes. I guess I'm going to start off with the vision and mission, and by now in this process you probably have one or think you have one, but I just want to point out that every Fab Lab has a different vision and mission, but don't set it in stone, because as our abilities change, our objectives and goals change, so then will your vision and mission. And that's going to come apparent with the rest of this slide here. The goals and objectives obviously are determined by your vision and mission, and like I said earlier, our Fab Lab is a completely different animal than we started out. So goals and objectives have changed, and hence the vision and mission had to change also. Curriculum emphasis is at where we stand right now. We don't want to get involved in the actual writing of any curriculum, but what we have been very successful in is attaching the project or activity to the curriculum, and that was how I was able to get into the area school district with dozens of schools. And they told me that the way to do that was to attach every project to the curriculum. So we will actually sit down with teachers, figure out where they are in the curriculum, what they're covering, design a project around that, and then bring the students in to work on that. Outreach strategy. I think that's going to be different for everybody. My outreach strategy was to keep the lab full of kids, and I've probably been over successful on that because I'm very tired, and I run out of hours in a day. Right now we're running about 1,500 students through a semester, and last week it was 120. The week before that it was 150, and so whatever your strategy is, make sure you don't overdo it, because if you can't do any work anymore, then you're not going to do anybody any good. But the community outreach is going to be important no matter what kind of Fab Lab you have, especially to stakeholders and any kind of sustainability issues. Candidates for your Fab Lab team. That again is depending on your mission. Right now I have 2 interns, one that's part-time that kind of catches our slack. I have another intern that is technically a lab technician. She pretty much runs the lab when I'm not around. We partner on projects and we tag team all the time with our outreach. When I first started, I did not know how to operate any of the machinery. Now I can operate all of the equipment, and my lab technician concentrates a lot on the electrical, which the only thing I know how to do is get shocked. So if I were to lose her, I would definitely have to find another electronics person, because that's a really big part of your projects, your outreach, and my mission. So I would have to keep that going. But then again, what is your goals and objectives? What is your vision? Your strategy is going to determine what kind of people that you have. There was a suggestion for retired people, I think David said, and that does work. Will it work for you? I don't know. Would it work for me? Maybe. You have to make sure that your candidates, the people you have in the lab can relate. If you cannot relate to the children today, remember they were 18 months they're running around with an iPod. So most retirees might not be able to do that. Heck, I can't even do that. So half of the time when the kids are in there, they're helping me with my Facebook. So you can keep that in mind, I guess. Roles and responsibilities. Let's start at the bottom, I guess. I said I had one intern. He's an electronics person. He takes up our Slack. He runs the program Fab Lab when I'm not around, assists students in making projects. I have the lab technician in our main lab, the 2,500 square foot lab. She runs that lab when I'm not around. She helps me design, implement prototype projects. We also work with the program students over here and the community with our How to Make Almost Anything class. Myself, I run the lab. At least I'm responsible when things go wrong. That for sure I know. I order the equipment, I order the parts, and do all the scheduling, and am responsible for probably the direction that it's going, of course with approval of my boss, Jim. And I think I would call him the champion who basically got the Fab Lab going, and without him I wouldn't even have a job right now. So above Jim would be Jerry Eiler, my executive dean, who I would consider, what would we consider him? Executive sponsor. I'm lucky enough to have him. He really likes the outreach. He doesn't care what college they go to as long as they go to a college. I try and, of course, push our college, but he keeps writing the checks and we keep doing wonderful things. So that's, I think that covers what I was going to say on roles and responsibilities. Jim, did you have anything to add?
Just to show, I guess,
Jim?
The rest of our team. Go ahead, Carol.
Before you actually add something, there was a question from the audience. Steve, are your interns allowed to work in the lab without you or other faculty around?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
They are. We have a certification for each piece of equipment. They are both fully certified and comparable, and they're being paid by the college, so we're all covered.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. Jim, sorry about breaking in, but go ahead.
Oh, thank you for doing that, Carol. I guess to fill out the rest of our team then, because on the economic development side, we have adjunct faculty who work in different product development roles. We've had some other adjuncts who are involved with FIRST Robotics. If you happen to be an educational institution or have access to it, adjunct faculty can really augment a lot of the resources you need. And that kind of comprises our entire team. This planning phase obviously needs to, we've talked about all the elements and key considerations, but you do need to translate this into a formal plan. We can share, in our startup kit, we can share some examples of that, but you obviously need to have the major activities and tasks across some kind of timeline, identifying where the potential facilities and the site of your Fab Lab would be. Sherry Lassiter, who we haven't mentioned, who's the MIT Global Program Manager, does an amazing job of supporting Fab Labs and creating resources out there. On Fab Central, as we affectionately call it, there's very detailed configurations, links, specifications for the standard MIT configuration. And it was touched on earlier about the Fab Lab charter, but not every fabrication laboratory is necessarily an MIT Fab Lab. And the closer you can stay to the MIT blueprint and configurations, from a technical point of view, the more likely you are to be considered part of the network. The rest of the charter speaks to the philosophical, the interpersonal, and kind of the people commitments of the Fab Lab. But those are all things that need to go into the formal plan for your Fab Lab to get ready for the commitment phase.
Great. Thanks very much, Jim. So it seems that right now it's a good time to either take some more questions or move into the next phase, which would be the commitment phase. Do any of our participants have questions at the moment? Okay, Peter Troxler does. What about the other criteria that MIT is putting forward?
What is he referring to?
Such as, yep, he's actually getting to that. So,
Tara, while you're waiting, I wanted to say something on site selection too before you close me out.
Okay, so Steve, do you want to get into that first, or shall we answer Peter's question?
I'm good either way.
Okay, let's answer Peter's question, then we'll get back to site selection. So a couple of the things that Peter's noting regarding the criteria MIT is putting forward are free access at least 1 day per week, actively participating in the community, and this is additional to the machines and the charter. So are there any thoughts about that criteria that MIT is putting forward and how to plan for it? Jim, do you have any initial thoughts on that?
I think
David?
that is, in general, there's the philosophy, we all subscribe to the philosophy of having open access to some degree. When you start aligning that with the realities of your site, and Steve's got some important considerations on site selection, not every place is able to have the coverage, whether it be interns or technicians. I know, Peter, that when we visited you and your colleagues in the Netherlands, we visited a number of Fab Labs who would have dedicated days here or there to open access. I think it's a judgment call by Fab Labs. I know Kelly at Lorraine has certain hours that they're available to the public. We have some of that. We use more of a class mechanism to allow people to do that. But I think in terms of the spirit of the charter, you're able to recognize whatever the variations of support of the community and open access. The outreach that we do right now with groups, we feel kind of fulfills that.
Thanks, Jim. And I think we have some comments from David as well. David?
Just a quick statement that this whole business of access and openness is contingent on staffing and people. If you have responsible people present, you could run 24/7, as MIT tends to do. And this is one reason to try to reach out to as many possible responsible agents who could be mentors or monitors or assistants in the laboratory. The important thing is to make sure you don't have some kind of control that is so anal retentive that people are rigidly locked into a minimal schedule of some sort. I heard one case, I can't identify it right now, but the professor who was responsible for the lab didn't find the hours convenient for his personal schedule, and he was afraid the students would hurt the machinery, so he just kept it locked up. Nobody could use it. Wrong type of personality. But the key is finding enough able and responsible people, and then you can grow the hours and the clientele whom you admit.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, David. Steve, you had some other thoughts about site selection?
Yes, I just wanted to point out that our first Fab Lab was probably in the smallest room of any of the Fab Labs, and it was quickly outgrown. And they moved me over here, and it was almost like going into an empty Walmart. It was just humongous. But once you get everything moved in, and then my objectives and goals changed, and the community outreach went in a full force. Suddenly, I need 2 Walmarts now. So I would say take as much room as you can right up front, even if you think it's too big. If somebody offers it to you, take it. I guarantee that you're gonna outgrow it. That's just what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Hey, could you also tell us what's the square footage of the large lab that you have at FETC right now? Just to give us an idea of the kind of 2,500 square feet?
2,500 square feet.
Okay. Thank you very much. So we're going to move into the commitment phase right now, and we're going to hear from Kelly Zalesnik, and then some follow-up by David Richardson. So I think let's just start there. Kelly, can you enlighten us a little bit about the commitment phase and how that's worked for you and how you've seen it work for others as well?
Carol, can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay, great. I wasn't sure if I had unmuted my phone or not. Sorry, everyone.
No problem. Thank you.
I have to say, from my perspective, the commitment phase was really pretty easy. I work for an educational institution, which number one is a leg up. because we're a community college, we really are centered on providing services to our community. So again, it made it very easy. We had, the college proper had, coughed up a little bit of money, about $20,000, and put the lab in a closet. And so really, from a commitment standpoint, it was figuring out what we could do with the Fab Lab once we had it. And I have to tell you, we kind of came at it backwards. I mean, it was this new, novel, cool thing, and we knew we wanted one, and we didn't know what we were going to do with it. So we ended up having one, and then not quite knowing what to do with it at first. It initially was under the purview of a different division, the business division, and it's because they have a student group called Students in Free Enterprise, and they're really young entrepreneurs. So that seemed like a natural fit. But the problem was while the students were very entrepreneurial, they weren't necessarily technical, and so there wasn't the technical support or even understanding from within that division. And so it didn't really grow, it just sort of was physically there. And so it moved under the Engineering Technologies division, which I wasn't even the dean at the time that had occurred. But what was really a plus for us is that the particular leadership of our college is very collaborative. They're very partnership, collaboration based. Our president, will consider any partnership, anytime, anywhere, any day. When he's approached by people, he's very accessible. So, having that kind of person at the helm, and then the leadership, the vice presidents who share that sentiment, made it very easy for us to exist because they believe in innovation, they believe in entrepreneurship. Part of the mission of this college is, believe it or not, economic development, which is not really normally considered, or at the time was not considered, a typical cornerstone of a college. And so while we didn't exactly know what to do with the lab when we first got the equipment, our president could see that if Fab Labs could help people in developing countries create things that they need, we could certainly use it here in an educational standpoint, and certainly use it with the community to, again, promote development and innovation and creativity. So, having someone at that level is just so important. You got to have someone at the highest levels getting it, so to speak. And also when you think about someone having the authority and availability and resources to succeed, again, the fact that the Fab Lab was not an entity unto itself, but it was housed within an academic division, the intention all along was to put it somewhere where it would integrate into just the general operation of the college. So again, I had a leg up. I had to figure out what to do with it in consultation with faculty. We've had a few fits and starts. My predecessor almost started to turn it into sort of this novelty sign shop artistic thing, and what was happening was we were, I was concerned when I stepped in that we were actually bidding on jobs for signage and such, and I said, well, we're taking business away from businesses in the community. I don't think that's what we're supposed to be about. So we really refocused ourselves, and we said really what we're going to be about is education, training people in technology and invention and in innovation, and making it easy for them to have that access. So we started looking at ways that we could integrate the tools of the Fab Lab into educational programming, and then, as we've talked about before, how do we make it, routine recruitment of students that's, more hands-on than just bringing students in and talking at them, but giving them something to do and to take away and have a deeper understanding. So that Fab Lab champion, I guess in this case it would be me, is I really have the authority as a dean to direct funds towards the Fab Lab, to free people up to develop coursework. And one of the things that I am working on very keenly is with other faculty outside of my division. I would really like the Fab Lab to be seen as a resource, just like a library is. That students from other, our math and science division, or our business division, or our arts and humanities division, to be given an assignment, and they go to the Fab Lab to conduct that assignment. so that's really where I am driving our Fab Lab in a primary way. So again, you need to, depending on what organization you're with, you need to think about who has the funding or the resources within that organization to keep the Fab Lab going. Who is really committed? I have some faculty members that folks that are engineers proper tend to be a little critical at times, and I'm an engineer, so I can say that. And so I've had faculty tell me, well, that's just a toy. It's really cool, but it's just a toy. And so it really took finding the right faculty member who saw the potential. In this case, it was a faculty member, and could see the power and the value, not just in the tools, but as to David's point of view, in the connections to other colleges, to other Fab Labs, other groups, and globally, not just locally. And again, the college proper is backing our Fab Lab, so it makes it very easy for us. And I don't want I realize how easy it is for me compared to other folks who are trying to start up and trying to find funds. And nonetheless, we still write grant applications to the National Science Foundation and to other local organizations and sponsors trying to find money to extend the work that we want to do. So we are feeling a financial pinch right now, as many community colleges are. And so while I have the authority to direct funds, I also have the responsibility to seek grant funding. And you have to consider in the commitment phase, what additional support is going to be needed. And really, I think that comes in with, how are your day-to-day operations going to look? There was just a question about, who is allowed to work in the lab, and do they have the authority? Can you afford to pay them? One of the things that I've tried to stay away from in terms of volunteers is having volunteers oversee the Fab Lab, and that's simply because being a volunteer, there's always the desire to do good work and help people out, but if something gets in the way, all of a sudden you don't have someone to be in an open lab. So we try to use those as paid positions, but we also have some adjunct faculty that are retired from NASA. And are they're great at helping us out and helping us develop projects for our students, and they use it all the time. So from an additional support, you really have to think about the ongoing materials. I don't have to worry too much about keeping the lights on and paying the electricity, but I do have to worry about materials and people and availability. And then I think the last comment, how can we qualify and formalize internal, external commitments? Again, I want to go back to Stephen's point previously, that you have to make sure that you don't overextend yourself. So, we really started off small, and, we said, well, we're going to run, one class a semester. And, we want to take it basically, we have a log, and we keep track of who comes into the lab. And that starting small has really allowed us to manage our growth in a way that we can afford to manage it. So we don't have a herd of people trying to necessarily schedule time in the lab where we can't accommodate them. We don't ever want to disappoint anybody. So part of the commitment is sort of having doing it in a controlled enough way that it doesn't run away from you, and all of a sudden you don't have the financial resources to support people who really are going to want to use it. And in very I think that's pretty much all I have.
Thank you, Kelly. So David, do you have some additional thoughts on the commitment phase, or perhaps some resources and recommendations that you'd like to share?
Just 4 very brief points here. First of all, I think Steve is absolutely right. Start small and then prove to people that you can perform what you set out to do, and at the same time give a little bit more than you promised. This is always better to promise a little and perform more than to promise much and perform less. So your whole idea of starting small and modestly, and then quickly you will grow the resources and show that the demand is so great that you will be able to expand and get the support. This is critical once you have tentative commitment to show that Fab Labs can do what we say they can do. So the first thing is to get a tentative commitment, demonstrate what they can do, perform, and then add a little bit of extra. Often I think you will find that the original mission will morph into something else, as Steve and several others have mentioned. For example, we have a need for STEM education. Fab Labs are wonderful tools for recruiting people into those disciplines, which are difficult disciplines. They have the additional advantage of helping to retain. Retention is just as important as recruitment. So where you can find the value added beyond what has been promised, I think you will reinforce, you'll stabilize the commitment that you get tentatively at the beginning. Actually, that subsumes several little points here, but one thing I would like to state is about the authority of the persons responsible. Kelly, for example, as a dean, has official authority, but it's extremely important that each person who's involved in the Fab Lab recognizes the freedom and the authority that he has at that particular role. Sometimes we just have to have faith in each other that go for it, try it, and come back and tell me. You don't want to turn everyone loose into a chaotic situation, but one of the democratic aspects of the Fab Lab will show up under commitment. If the individuals using it are committed to it, they will perform responsibly. And you can go through each segment of people responsible for the Fab Lab and give them a clear definition of what they are authorized to do on their own, and then where they should go to seek other approval or verification of what they're up to. But this is an extremely important part of the spirit of Fab. And I'll stop right there. I see the slide that's up on the screen right now. You can see a wonderful spectrum here of the President of the United States, the President of the college, Scott Zetek, the professor responsible for the lab, and two 10th grade geometry students sitting in Lorraine's Fab Lab during his visit about a year ago. That's the kind of mixture you need. Gender, race, age, technology, values, and Fab Labs pull them all together. The end.
Thank you, David. I see we have a question already about can you address the liability issues? So panelists, if you could raise your hand to let me know if you'd like to answer that, or Barbara, if you'd like to answer that, just let me know. Okay. And just give me a moment. Okay, Jim, go ahead.
I know, for the new folks, that question comes up a lot, and we don't want to downplay it, but I guess it's one advantage of the academic environment is that the liability insurance is already kind of built into this, what we do. As Steve mentioned, and he had to break away because we have a room full of, Fab Lab full of students right now, we do a certification process and a safety procedures to do our utmost to minimize any exposures or risks. Because we have a trusted technician between her and Steve, we're able to keep an eye on things. I think if you talk to the folks at in the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana, Betty Barrett and her team, they're going more of a community Fab Lab and have a community facility, so their insurance and liability considerations might be different. I know Phyllis, you've done a tremendous job of being the champion for what you folks are doing and have some unique considerations. But if you can leverage existing facilities that already have the coverage and can add a rider or that type of thing, that's often the best way to approach it. Otherwise, there has to be some incremental liability or insurance coverage, you would have to factor that into your justification business plan.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, and so right now what I'd like to do is open this up to additional questions. We are at the end of the Planning and Justification Fab Lab webinar segments, but right now if there are questions that any of our participants have, please bring them forward. If you could raise your hand or type into the chat box, that would be great, and then we'll address your questions as they come up.
Can I answer the liability question a little bit now? I think I'm unmuted and not talking
yes,
to myself.
Please, Barbara.
Yes, I think it's a great thing to have this community because as we've said several times, we're so willing to share stories with each other, and we've become so much more intelligent on each other's backs. So things like waiver forms, things like not having children in the lab by themselves, not having one child, one adult in the lab by themselves, not having, making sure everybody does a photo waiver release. All of those things are just really helpful. And you know, we're sort of trying to do sort of a Boy Scouts pledge, especially when it talks about, the Fab Lab Charter talks about cleaning up after oneself and just having safety first. So sort of building that into the culture of the lab, safety and liability issues, I think, has been quite important for us because at our lab we have several young children as well, and modifying our eagerness to sort of take on board pre-reading age students as well. We found that they are just so much better. They're so much more likely to be successful and less frustrated if we make sure they're at a level where they can sort of manipulate the data and manipulate the software and follow instruction that much more easily. But it's something that we've all learned together, which I appreciate very much.
Barbara, thank you very much. I'd like to ask folks to mute if they aren't speaking because we do have some typing going on in the background, it seems. And there are a couple of questions online right now. One of the questions that has just arisen is how do you handle intellectual property for things set up in the lab? So I assume that's how do we handle the intellectual property question for people who have created inventions in the lab? And then following that question, we'll have a question from Thomas Cobb, and then we'll see if we have some more. Okay, Jim, if you'd like to begin answering that question about intellectual property, please.
Sure. You need to look at approaches from a couple different perspectives. From an individual Fab Lab, we each have to make our own call on intellectual property. The Fab Lab Charter and MIT Charter does allow the coexistence of proprietary inventor development while at the same time having the shared open access. This has been a discussion point at a number of global Fab Lab meetings. If you're not familiar with those, they have Fab 6 was the most recent one that was held in Amsterdam last year. It gave us a chance to meet Peter and all our colleagues. You know, the USFLN built a relationship with a number of the folks over there. And so that is a big discussion point there. Going back to Fab 4 in Chicago, we had a roundtable discussion with patent attorneys and other folks. And you run into a lot of considerations and unique aspects of that depending on which country you're speaking of and how much intellectual property is respected or how robust it is. In our individual Fab Lab, as we work with inventors, you can't have a valid patent in the United States unless you identify anybody who contributed significantly to it. So we've been named as a co-inventor in 11 patents. However, we turn around and waive any financial gain from that. Being a public sector institution, we do have a 501c3 fund set up. So our inventors have kind of informally promised they'll donate to that as a hardship fund for inventors, for future inventors. But if you're a public sector entity, you do have to pay attention, make sure you're protecting the intellectual property of the users of your Fab Lab. We installed a second hard drive in the computers in our Fab Lab. If somebody really wanted to come in and do something proprietary, wanted to secure their data, you know, we would have the ability to do that. But to be honest with you, that's never come up. So as far as the global Fab Lab network, or as Peter has alluded to, the international Fab Lab community, that's going to be an ongoing discussion, but I think there already are cases and the potential where we can protect people's interests and still keep the spirit of Fab Labs going.
Thanks, Jim. I noticed a comment from Thomas Cobb about whether all the Fab Labs are operating within the context of academia, or are there examples of Fab Labs operating as independent businesses? Peter responded a little bit about many of the European examples being outside of academia. And I just wanted to respond quickly to Tom's question. There are a lot of Fab Labs in the U.S. that seem to be within an academic college institution. However, there are a number of them. Some of the more recent ones that are springing up are much more community-based and even just straight up community-based. For example, the one in Fab Lab Tulsa, or in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Then Fab Lab DC is completely community-based. I believe then there are others that are sort of inside museums, but those are still community-based Fab Labs. For example, the one in Sarasota, Florida at the Gee Whiz Museum, and then that one's much more recently opened its doors, I think within the last couple of months. And then another Fab Lab in a museum, the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, has been around for quite some time, at least since 2008 or so, if not if it didn't open its doors earlier than that. So
I know that Blair Evans at Insight Focus in downtown Detroit as well is very much a community-based Fab Lab, which isn't really very interested in it focuses much more on putting people, at-risk young people together to work on a common either environmental or ecological or societal problem, and sort of sneaks all these Fab Lab tools in on them along the way. So the students not only are sort of solving world peace and ending hunger, but they're also learning these fantastic personal fabrication skills along the way. So that's one of my favorite ones.
And Barbara, you just reminded me about Jeff Sturgis. He's also in the Detroit area right now. He's doing Mount Elliott Makerspace is one of the pieces he's doing, as well as Omnicore Detroit. He also worked on Sustainable South Bronx. All of those Fab Lab-like entities that Jeff has worked on have all been strictly community-based. So I think those are some good examples for Fab Labs, at least in the United States, that are community-based. So Peter just asked if who is going to Fab 7. I guess raise your hand if you're going to Fab 7. I know that I'd like to go. I just don't have plans to do so yet. Anybody else? Okay. Are there any other questions that people may have before I turn this over to Mark for a little while? Okay. Kelly?
Actually, I don't have a question, but I did want to make a special thanks to Barbara Craig. I omitted Barbara in the thank yous up front for participating in the webinar, and Barbara, I certainly didn't mean to do so. I was really actually just had the leadership team in my mind for the USFLN, but Barbara's insights and her experiences are incredibly valuable. And she is a very high energy person, so I would highly recommend anyone chatting with Barbara, as you go forth in your plan. She's a wonderful person to work with and a great supporter. So Barbara, I just wanted to thank you.
Well, Kelly, you're very wonderful to say. It's been wonderful to listen to your eloquent and wonderful expertise, and you've just given me an opportunity to apologize for sounding like such a blithering idiot because my presentation disappeared as the IT guys were trying to work with the support to get me online. So thank you for letting me be so extemporaneous. Thank you.
And thank you very much to all of our panelists. You've all been great, and the expertise and the experience that you've all provided has been really wonderful. So with that, are there any wrap-up comments that any of the panelists would like to make?
Never hesitate to talk.
Jim, go ahead.
Carol and I alluded to this earlier, but we have used this format for some in-depth planning for different organizations. And so we just want to reiterate that, if you contact Carol or I, we can customize, adapt this to do a more full-blown workshop for you in this fiscally detailed planning. And feel free to share that with other, colleagues of yours as you do any research or interest generation. That's all I had, Carol.
Okay, thanks, Jim. So I'm going to turn this over to Mark right now, and I think he's going to give us, walk us through a survey.
Thank you, Carol. Yes, I'm going to put up a survey, and this is going to help decide what Fab Lab does for future webinars and everything else. So please take a moment to answer this the survey that is coming up. I ask the moderators not to close the survey. If the survey has not come up, please type it in the chat box. And the reason why I ask that is Question Pro's been having trouble with their servers. So, great. Is nobody seeing the survey?
Not seeing the survey.
Yeah.
Seeing cannot display this page.
Yeah, we're Question Pro this morning. I was on there. They were having problems yesterday, and looks like they're having more problems. I apologize for this.
Okay. Well, that's all right.
One more time.
All right.
Some people
folks
are
saying that they see it. Interesting.
Okay.
I'm not seeing anything.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it at all. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, okay, there, maybe you see it now?
I don't.
Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to post, I'm seeing it right now, so I'm going to post it into the chat box. So for those of you who do not see it on the window, go ahead and click the chat box. If you see it on the window, go ahead and okay.
There are some folks who say
if you filled it out, it won't disappear until I take it down. So all you have to do is just hit the submit button, and then your answers will have been submitted. But
should panelists stay off?
Thank you, Peter, for joining us. Either very late for him or very early. I don't timeline.
There's actually a few folks over from Europe. So Mark, how long do you usually give folks?
Okay, has everybody finished the survey? Since there's such few people, I can just ask that. If you have not finished the survey, please raise your hand.
Do you want panelists on there?
That's up to Carol.
I think it's fine, David, if you want to.
I think we should just keep it participants, not panelists.
Okay, I agree.
Okay, I'm going to give you 30 more seconds, and then that way you guys can, and then I'll shut it down. So please submit. Carol and Jim, do you want to give any final comments real quick?
Well, I know that Jim has talked about some information. There was there's a page that follows the survey page, but I think I'm going to go over it now.
I'm going to turn off the survey anyways.
Okay. So
there you go.
As Jim has already said a few different times, in-depth customized workshops can be arranged by contacting either myself or Jim. So our emails are up there and available, and for those of you who received the guide in advance, which I think is everybody listed here, you have our emails. And then again, this webinar will be posted later, so you'll be able to contact us that way as well. The recordings of the webinar are going to be online at present. I don't know what that what the access is for that and how to get to it, but once we have that information, I'll make sure to post it on the USFLN Facebook page. For those of you who don't know how to get to that, but you do have Facebook accounts, go to Facebook. In the search box, just type in United States Fab Lab, and it'll pull up the USFLN Facebook page. I'll also make sure that the information about this webinar is posted on the Twitter site for USFLN, and also on the USFLN website, which is www.usfln.org. And finally, I want to remind you all that we will have the second part of this that will go over Fab Lab implementation and sustainability. To remind you of what those phases are, that's installation, training, implementation, enhancement, maintenance, and sustainability. The date for that is not yet scheduled, nor do we have the panelists set up for that yet. But once we do, I'll make sure that an announcement goes out. It'll go out via the avenues listed above, but since all of you also joined this webinar, I'll ensure that I send out an email to all of you inviting you to that as well. And I think that's all I have. Jim, do you have any other final thoughts before we turn it back over to Mark for a wrap?
No, I just ask that the panelists look at the chat room number I just put out there so we can debrief afterwards. If you can call that number, we'll start working on the next webinar.
Okay. And again, thank you very much to our panelists, and thank you to all of our participants who joined from all over the world. I mean, we've got folks from Hawaii who have joined us, and it's got to be extremely early over there, and folks from Ireland and the Netherlands and Finland, as well as, you know, folks from the main U.S. So again, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a pleasure to provide to you, and Mark, if you have any final words for us, please let us know.
Well, just to mention real quick, there is the High Tech Conference at San Francisco, and it is a technology conference. So if any of you are going to be in the San Francisco area, it is a great way to promote Fab Lab and talk about it with other community colleges and stuff like that. I mean, when I heard about this, I thought this was a fantastic project, and we'd love to get a Fab Lab out in Maricopa. So thank you very much, and you guys all have a great weekend.